Hello, everybody. Um, Hello, Nestor, and hello, Pat. I didn't get to say hello to you in the chat. Welcome to the fifth and penultimate live session of the course. Please do. Stop it, you two. Please do put a quick note in the chat for me, just to let me know if you can see and hear me okay. Kathy, your son-in-law wants your eggs. Cool. I seem to remember that went extremely well. Yeah, that mask, Daphne, amazing. Yeah, difference. It's just as long as you set a name, so I can see who's talking. You don't actually need to be logged into the chat. Just knowing that you're there and who's putting the comment is enough for me. Hello, Mary Lynn. Thanks, Nesta. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, it's a miracle, everything working straight out of the bat. So, welcome to the session. Today we have a new subject and new materials. The way that I'm going to go through this session today is perhaps a little bit different than you might be used to if you've done value studies with me before as part of workshops, because those studies were about nailing values with a view to adding color later. This subject is about form. So the main thing I want to start with today is number one, mixing an accurate value scale. Okay, so we're going to do that live. Obviously, we're going to try and draw this out fairly carefully. We don't want to rush the drawing because I think you're all aware now more, perhaps, of the link between accurate drawing and accurate values. And if the two are working together, then that's where form comes from, and edges. And speaking of edges, we're going to be focusing a little bit on that today, okay, in an interesting way. Some of you will have done before and some of you won't have done. So the goal today is first to mix a value scale, second to have a nice accurate block-in, and third to put in the main value areas as blocks only and have a look at the edges. Okay, now I think what I would like to do is for the next session is to continue with this subject, but I'm going to set you some homework at the end of today's session, which I'm hoping you'll be able to do and post in the group so I can have a look at it. And if you can do that homework well, then I would like for you to continue painting over this study in more layers. So my challenge to you for this project, for this piece of work, is to get the smoothest, most gentle, most seamless gradations in paint than you've ever painted. Whatever stage you're at now with that, I want you to really try to push that skill further. But we need to start with a strong foundation, and that means getting all the right values in the right place. Now, what happened for quite a few of us with the egg drawing was that looking at the cloth as a white cloth threw our expectations and perceptions out, and the values ended up a bit lighter than they should have been. None of that today, okay? So hopefully you've seen the post in the Facebook group and the email with the extra images that I've added today. There's one of the subject with the value numbers spotted all over it. And there's another one of the lemon with each of the modeling factors drawn out, and then the value that we want for each of the modeling factors in there, except for two that I couldn't fit in the picture. So I'll just tell you those, the core shadow and the highlight, okay? So these things hopefully will help us get a more, hi Kathy, hi Marilyn. These things will hopefully get us to very accurate blocking by the end of today's session. Accurate drawing and accurate values. And a bit of edge handling. That's all we're looking for today, okay? So I'm going to switch over to the easel now. Easel cam. Here we go. So here we have 8x10 ampersand panel, the photo reference. There. This is like a kind of very difficult for me. And the palette. So what I'm going to do immediately is I'm going to switch over and make the palette full screen. And I'm going to take the reference image off for now, because the main thing we want to focus on to begin with is getting our value scales sorted. So, value scale. Titanium white, raw umber, and ivory black. Now, I think I'm going to bring up the exposure of this camera a little bit. It's funny, when I put, there's some kind of auto-correct, I think, on the cameras. When I put anything white on the palette, it seems to change the exposure a little bit. I think that's better. Let me knock out the big light, though. We don't want the big light on there. How's that? Okay, yeah. So, the first thing we want to do is mix a middle value, okay? Now, I'm not actually too bothered about whether you get the proportions of the raw umber and the ivory black perfect. I'm not bothered about whether they're perfect neutrals. What I am very, very bothered about is that the value is exact, okay? God, my value scale is such a state. I really want to make sure that you mix really accurate values. So take care with this stage, because if the values are out, then when you mix them, when you put them on the painting, it will compromise the form. One interesting thing about this, however, is that you can see that the vast majority of the values that I mix are from low to middle, high, middle. Don't often get high up in the high values. Or maybe I just guess those a lot of the time, who knows. Just cleaning this up a bit because it's getting, I think that's probably charcoal dust underneath that I'm getting on my palette. Bit annoying. Everybody's very happy today, except those of you who are really enjoying the charcoal. You could do some more, you know, if you really like it. Hello, Mariana, no problem. Good to see you. So, the easiest way to do this, I think, you can do it really obsessively to try and get perfect neutrals. I'm not bothered about that. Just want to get the values right. So we're going to mix a 1 to a 9. We're not going to mix the values in between the half-step values. And what I tend to do is, as I go down the value range, I tend to add a little bit more of the raw umber, and as I go up the value range, I add a little bit more of the black, so that I end up, you could say, although you know I don't like these words, cooler high values and warmer lower values. And it's a nice effect on a value study, but it's by no means necessary, okay? So the first thing we want to do is mix a middle value. That's raw umber. And I'm going to get slightly less ivory black. As I say, I'm not actually bothered about whether you have more raw umber or ivory black. What I am very bothered about is that the values are nailed. This, how much paint you need to pick up will come with time and with practice. I picked up about the same amount of titanium white. If we were using lead white for this, you would need an awful lot more paint. So for me, a nice thing about my palette is that I know that it's close to a value 5. It's very slightly lighter than a value 5. So if I just mix a value that's pretty close to my palette, I know I'm going to be close. Now this has slightly more raw umber in it, so it's slightly, you could say it's slightly warm. Personally, I prefer that for value studies. So then I'm going to get a bit of this and I'm going to check it against my value scale. And that's kind of unfortunate because I'm pretty much bang on. I'm very slightly too dark, okay? Let's really try and nail this. So I'm going to add a little bit of white. Might have overdone it now. I've been so used to using flake white, lead white lately that I might have thrown in a little bit too much white. But make sure you mix, when you mix them together, make sure you mix it thoroughly. And also make sure when you pick a little dab of it up to put it on your scale that your palette knife is clean. So I'm constantly wiping my palette knife. Because if there's any value already on your palette knife, it will mix with whatever you pick up, you know. So that's pretty much nailed a value 5. Okay. Pop me a quick yes in the chat if you're painting along when you've got your value 5 mixed and you're happy that it's accurate. I'll give you a couple of minutes with that. Because I know, probably for me, having done this like many times, I kind of intuitively have an idea of the quantities of the paint that I need, and I tend to get there fairly quickly. Once you've got your mid-value 5 mixed, I want you to put it a little bit to the right of the paints we've got here laid out, but try and make it vertically in the middle of your palette. So we're going to mix a value scale. We're going to have the light ones at the top and the dark ones at the bottom. We're going to mix a value string. And don't mix a teeny tiny amount. You know, make sure that you've got enough in there. A good size splodge, which is, as everybody knows, a scientific term for the correct amount of paint. I'm being flippant because there's absolutely no way that I can tell you exactly how much paint there is there. Let's look for something that's a standard size. Here is an ordinary pencil. That's how big my splodge is compared to a pencil. Wow, look at you all go. You're getting good at this value stuff. That was fast. Brilliant. Okay, so next we're going to go for the 7. So this time I'm going to have a smaller amount of raw umber, slightly more black. It's up to you. I mean, it really doesn't matter. I've overdone that a little bit. I've got too much of both. Squidge them together a bit, and then I'm going to bring in more white this time. A bigger dollop of white. combine the dollops into a splodge. And we're after a value 7, a higher value than the one we just mixed, obviously. So the thing to do is to mix it all in. Make sure it's really nicely blended together. And then check it against your value scale. Wipe this first. Pick up a little bit on the bottom. And then pop it on the scale. Value 7. Yeah, I think I've nailed it, which is unfortunate again. But if you're not really sure, then put a little bit on the Centauri scale. Put a little bit on the one below, and a little bit on the one above. And that is a good way to check. So you can see hopefully that this is slightly darker than the value on the scale, and this is slightly lighter than the value on the scale. This one might be like a touch dark. I'll put a tiny bit of white. Now I've mixed mine, you could say slightly cooler. I would prefer to say it's a little more blue because it has more black, but there's no need for you to do that. You can mix them all with just like mostly raw umber and white if you want, and you get a really nice sepia tone. All that matters is that we really nail the values, okay? So let me know when you've got your value 7. And we put this like halfway between the 5 and the white. Above the white, in a line. We're gonna lay them out in a line like this. So let me know when you've got your 7 done. Now, usually, when I'm teaching value studies, I usually only mix the value 3, the value 5, and the 7, and then use either the raw umber or the black or a combination of both, and the white as being the extremes of the scale. And it works really well for you know, just straight down the line value studies. But we're going to try and be a little bit more exact with this. So some of the values that we want to hit are half values, you know, halfway in between. So for this one, I want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that when we mix our in-between values, that we're pretty sure that they're right. But I like to approach it this way by mixing the middle and then the middle of the other, of the middle and the light, and then the middle of the middle and the dark, because I think it helps you to gradually kind of hone your ability to judge relative values. Just pop me a little note in the chat box when you're happy. Good job, everybody. We're rocking today. Okay. So now obviously we want to go for the 3, this value here, which is halfway between the middle value and our low value. So me personally, I'd be inclined to use a higher proportion of raw umber here because I'm going down into the shadow. By no means necessary, but and you want to use quite a lot of raw umber because titanium white is very powerful in comparison to the raw umber. So it actually goes up the value scale quite quick. So you probably need to use a little bit more raw umber than you think. And then I'm going to use like a smaller amount of black. You see that? Big splodge of raw umber, small little splodge of black. And I'm going to pick up just a small amount of white. Mix those together. Because I don't want to overdo this. Even that might be too much white. Let's take a little bit of that out. You kind of want to approach the value 3 bit by bit because it's very, very easy to overshoot and go too light when you're using titanium white. And by the way, using titanium white means that it will take this first pass a little longer to dry than it would with lead white. With lead white, you could probably go over most of it the next day. Titanium white, you need to leave it a little bit longer. Okay, so same thing, wipe off the palette knife, get a little bit on the back of the palette knife, stick it against the value 3. And if you're not sure, put a little bit on the value above, a little bit on the value below, and the one below should stand out as being slightly lighter. The one above should stand out as being slightly darker. So let me know when you've got your 3. So you can hopefully see on your screen, I'm never too sure how well screens show this stuff, but my 7 is distinctly more blue than my 3, which has a greater proportion of raw umber in it. As I say, it's an aesthetic thing, really. I think it looks nice in the studies, but it doesn't matter too much. As long as you know the values, that's the main thing. I'm just showing you this because it's a nice thing to do. It's nice. I think even when you're producing a value study, it's nice to have something that you can be proud of, you know. And it's entirely possible to paint value studies that knock people for 6. I mean, you know, the drawings that you've been doing with the chalk, knock me for 6, you know. They're amazing. And you can do the same with paint. Pat says, is there an issue if yours looks lighter than mine? I'm going by the big book. Ignore the screen, Pat, and go by the chips. Absolutely, go by the chips. Always trust the chips. The screen is very unreliable. The chips are completely reliable. Thanks, Pat. When I say completely reliable, they're more reliable than a screen. More reliable than our eyes, let's say. Reliable enough. I was talking to Richard Murdoch the other day online, and he was saying that he recently found out that, I'm not sure if it was Pantone or if it was Monsell.com, he was talking to, they were saying that they admitted that the big book is, they say 30% of the chips are not accurate on average. So it's just as well we don't go for too obsessive accuracy, except with the values. Thanks, Marilyn. Marilyn's there too. Just let me know when you've got your 3 done. And we're not in any rush. I mean, if I go a little bit faster with the mixing than you're comfortable with, then remember, obviously, you can come back and remix and check again. And at least be very careful when you put the values down on the panel that they're, you know, you can check them on the scale and make sure that they're right. Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Catherine. Marianne is ready. Okay, so Next, we're going to go for the value between the 5 and the 7. The easiest way, if you've mixed enough of these, if you haven't done tiny little mixes, good healthy splodges, then the easiest way to do that is to get some of the 7 and put in a little of the 5. You're going to probably want more 7 than 5. So we're after a 6 now between these two. Personally, I think it helps to start with more of the 7 and then gradually bring it down. So I'm going to check that against my 6. I'm a bit too light, so I need to bring in a little bit more of my 5. If you find that you don't have enough and you're running out of your 7 or your 5, then mix it from scratch, because you need to make sure that you have enough. It's not the end of the world if you run out, it slows down your painting. One nice thing about working with a solid reference like Munsell is that you can always mix exactly the same value or exactly the same color again if you need it. It's still a little bit light. I'm going to bring in, I don't want to run out of any more of my my 5, so I'm going to bring the value down a little bit with raw umber and black. Remember, you can check the value above and the value below if you're not sure. That's a good 6. So I'm going to put that, I'm going to just pop it like a little bit to the side. In between those, a little bit to the side, so I'll make sure that I've got room. I want a little bit of room between them because I'm going to be mixing between them for the study to make sure that we get the right values. And it's really a really good idea to give your palette a quick wipe after each color. So let me know when you've got that one done. Value 6. Okay, so we've got 5, 6, 7. So next we want to mix the 8. So I'm going to take a little bit of my 7. As I say, don't worry about it if you're running out of this. If you don't have enough, then mix it from scratch. It's basically the same thing, it's just a little bit slightly quicker if you take it from what you've already got. And I'm going to bring in a bit of white. Now, titanium white is a very, you could say it's a cool white. It tends towards blue. Unlike lead white, which tends towards orange. So that was just, I grabbed some of myself and put in a little bit of white, and I'm going to check that against the 8. Much too dark, needs to come up quite a long way. So we've got 2 to mix here because we want the 8 and the 9. So make sure that you're doing the 8. That's looking better, still slightly dark, a bit more white. Still a bit dark. So just bear in mind that you don't, the main thing is, that's good. The main thing is that you don't want to run out of any of these. You want enough to paint with. So if you find yourself running out by mixing from your original splodges, then just mix from scratch. So that's my 8, so I'm going to put it slightly to the right and above. And for the 9, I'm just going to, now titanium white is actually is about a 9.5. So you don't need to drop it very far. So I'm going to start with titanium white and put in a small amount of black and the tiniest amount of raw umber. You really just want to drop this a tiny bit for a value 9. It shows the difference between a 9 and a 9.5 can really show in your paintings, you know. So we want to make sure that this one is good too. So I'm going to check that. So this is the bottom one on the Kentore scale, the bottom right, value 9. That looks good. So I'm going to put that a little to the left. So that's the top half of the value scale mixed. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let me know when you've got your 8 and your 9. And we'll go on to the bottom half of the scale. Titty, you've done 4 already. We haven't done 4 yet, we did 3. You're steaming ahead, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, you know. I just want to make sure that everyone is... you can also do them in any order you like. I mean, it really doesn't matter. I just want to make sure that everyone has got an accurate value scale laid out before we start. Because I want you to really, really focus on banging the right value in the right place on this. We've got cloth again, and we've got shadow on cloth. So we want to really be strongly focused on making sure the right value goes in the right place. And in a sense, it's easier with paint because we already will have the values mixed, and then we just need to pick them up, right? If I say a value 3 or a value 4, then you just need to pick it up and put the dab down. With the charcoal mixing technique, you have to gradually move towards the value. And it can seem like a very long journey sometimes. Here, with the difference with paint is that we're we're getting all of our values ready right at the start. But you know, this lemon is it's not quite as tricky a subject as the egg, but it's a very smooth lemon, this one. So the challenge with this subject is going to be creating as smooth gradations with paint as you can make now with charcoal and chalk. That's the challenge. And yes, you won't often want to paint them that smooth, but there are times that you will. There are times that you will need to. And if you can do it, it's a very, very useful skill to have. If you want to paint anything white, or even a light local value, if you want to paint something like this, you know, the gradations that you need to do from the light to the shadow to make a form like that turn are very, very subtle. Marilyn, yeah, a very long journey, it can feel like sometimes mixing those. In some ways this is quicker, but that can also be your enemy, because you can go, oh, that's close enough. And, you know, you've all had the experience of really having to work for your values now. So I want you to try to bring some of that focus to the value work that we're going to do with paint now. Long journey in charcoal, yes indeed, but deliberately so, you know. It takes a lot of sensitivity to be able to do really, really fine gradations in paint, as we're going to be trying to do in this piece, you know. Today we're not bothering with gradations. We're just putting in the overall values and doing some edge handling. But what I'm going to be asking you to do for homework at the end of this is to do a full value scale like this, and then to do a smooth gradation between the values, so that what you end up with is a strip in paint of a smooth gradation from a value 1 to a value 9. It's not easy. Very few painters can do it. But you can actually, but only because they haven't practiced it, because they've never tried to do it, you know. But if you can do that, then your painting will be on another level. Okay, I'm going to go for the 4 now, between the 3 and the 5. Now I've used a little bit of my 5 already, so I'm going to mix this one from scratch. I'm going to use a bit more raw umber because I'm going down a little bit the value scale. So I'm happy to have a higher proportion of raw umber. It's, by the way, this is just to mirror what happens with very low chroma locals. It's not, it doesn't always happen this way, that you get warmer, higher chroma shadows, only with very low chroma and neutral locals. How many more sessions are there in Foundation, Susan says? There's 1 more live session, 2 more critiques. And also, I completely forgot to send the email last week to remind you to book a time with me, because I want to have one more chat with all of you individually as well about where you're at now. And we'll do those over the next couple of weeks. Next maybe 2-3 weeks. So we've got 4 weeks left, including today. So I'm going to pick up a small amount of white to start with. Going for a value 4 now. How are you finding this, by the way, everybody? Are you finding it not too bad, not too onerous, or are you finding it difficult to match? you can just, if you want to, you can just stop long enough to put easy or difficult or okay or something. One word is fine in the chat. I think this, my value 4 is a little light. Looking at this, it looks like it's closer to my 5, but let's check. Because Visual Systems are very, very bad at this job. It is a little bit light, so I'm going to bring in a bit more raw umber. And just a touch of black. The black is more opaque, so the black will drop the value quicker than the raw umber. Raw umber is a very weak tinter. I'm not sure why that is. Must something to do with the nature of the pigment, I suppose. I'm still a little bit light. I must mix value 4s a lot because most of my value 4 little swatch on my Centauri scale has got little dabs of paint all over it that I've forgotten to wipe off. Fun, brilliant. Okay, easy, okay, and easy. See, what I hope for is the very exacting work that we did with the charcoal is going to make all of this that we do with paint seem easier now. So we've been on a trajectory approaching paint. If we'd have just gone straight in with paint, I don't think it would have been half as effective. So what I've tried to do is deliberately pull everybody back and slow you down for first accurate drawing, and then thinking very carefully about the modeling factors of light and shadow and gradations in between them. And then some really intense value work with the charcoal and chalk. So now coming back to paint, you've got that experience behind you. Got my 4. Going to put that a little to the side. I know it does seem that it's gone fast. When we started it, I was thinking 3 months. I mean, that's long, you know. Normally my workshops are 6 weeks. But actually, I think possibly because the way I've divided it up, like 2 sessions, 1 month on traditional charcoal, 2 sessions, which is 1 month on the charcoal and chalk, and then now we've got 2 sessions, which is 1 month on the paint. We've been on quite a journey already, I think, and we've still got, you know, we've still got some good stuff to come. Oh, Ginny, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope it's not too serious. So similarly as we did with the top, we need 2 more values now. So we've gone 5, 4, 3. So then we need a value 2 and a value 1. Now raw umber is just about a value 1 anyway. Slightly below. But I do want a 2. And what I tend to find is I often run out of these lower values, the 3 and the 4. So I'm going to mix my 2 separately. I'm running out of raw umber now. I'm going to get a bit more raw umber out. You can never have too much raw umber, I find. It's just like a magic color. Good for everything. Dropping chroma, mixing values, making shadows. Put it in your coffee. Small amount of black. because I want this to be going gradually higher chroma and with a bit more of the orange of the raw umber in it. And little bit, and I'm just going to put a little bit of white in to start off with, because this is going to be easy to overshoot, and I'll have to load loads of more raw umber in if I want to bring it down further. So I'm after a value 2 now. It's really easy to get this too light, in the same way as it's very easy to get your very light values too dark. But you mixing value scales like this, you get a feel for mixing after a while, for quantities. Obviously, every pigment is different. Some are strong tinters and some are weak, so the amount that you need is different. And quite often they feel different as well under the palette knife, but it gives you a good feel, this. Check my value 2. Oh. It can't be bang on. Lower values can be tricky. I think it's slightly light, so I'm going to bring in a bit more raw umber, a tiny bit of black. There is a school of thought that says there's no need to worry about the lower values. But as I think you'll see on this study, the difference even between a 2.5 and a 3 can be enough to show a different form. And the subtlety you can see at both ends of the scale. Still a tiny bit too light. More raw umber, a tiny bit of black. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to finish mixing the scale, and then we'll have a tea break. And then we'll draw out the study. That's a nice 2. Pop this over to the side a little bit. This palette cleaning in between mixing is a habit that I got into a long time ago. I mean, I don't actually need to do it so much down these bottom values here, but I kind of think it's good practice anyway. So tell me what value you're on now. Everybody stick one number in and let me know. If you're doing them in the same order as me, let me know what value you're on, so I've got a good idea where everybody is. Well done, Becky. So Ginia, if you have a problem for the rest of this course and you do some of it after the live sessions are over, after the course is finished, then get in touch and we'll do some, when you do get to it, get in touch and we'll do some just one-to-one, couple of one-to-one critiques to make sure that you don't miss out. Look at you all keeping up, you're doing great. Mariana's steaming ahead, she's doing her 1. Okay, so the last one is the 1, and a good way to do this is if you get your raw umber and you pop it on the value 1, you'll see that it's really close, like almost indistinguishable from a value 1. It's probably very slightly darker. If you want to mix it as a proper neutral, then you would want to put in a little bit of ivory black as well. I'm going to put a tiny bit of ivory black with mine. Not very much, it's mostly raw umber. And just a little dot of white to counteract the black. and this will be my value 1. What I generally do, is if I'm painting a study like this where I've gone with the mixes, I've gone with a greater proportion of raw umber, so I've got a bit of chroma and a more raw umber mix in the shadows. I tend not to use the black except for perhaps the occlusion shadow, which we'll be talking about at some point. Happy with that? Number 1. There we go. A full Munsell value scale. Personally, I don't think you ever need to mix more than these. Usually for value studies, I only mix the 5, the 7, and the 3. And I find that's plenty. But having this is going to help us because we actually we're going for real accuracy on the values in this session. And we're going to want some that are halfway between, like a 2.5, against a 3, say. So we're going to want that difference to show. At the top end of the scale, we've gone up to a value 9, which is the highest that the Kentore scale goes to, okay? Now, what you could call 10, which would be white, isn't actually titanium white. 10 is kind of like full brightness, full reflection of light, and it's really theoretical. It would mean that the surface was reflecting all of the light that hit it, which surfaces actually don't. If you've got the big book, then you can check. This is my 9.5 chip. I'd say my titanium white is very slightly higher value than that. It's probably like a 9.6 or something. An ivory black down the bottom of the scale, like this is the darkest chip in the big book. This is like a 0.5. My ivory black is very, very slightly darker than that. Very, very slightly. It's about a 0.5. So the extremes, in terms of like a value 0 on the dark end of the scale and a value 10, you don't actually get those, but titanium white is the highest value we can get in paint. It's about a 9.5, and ivory black is the lowest, and it's about a 0.5. So we've got 0.5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 9.5. So we have the range of charcoal that we could work with, charcoal and chalk, was about a 1 to a 9. Probably wouldn't even get quite down to a 1. Okay, so we can actually go beyond that a little way with paint. Slightly wider value range. Okay, well done everybody. Let's have a 10-minute break, grab a cup of tea, and then when we come back we will block out the drawing for the study. Yeah, of course, Junior, if something gets in the way that you can't do anything about it, then I want to make sure that you get looked after, so. Okay, I'm going to go and make a cup of tea. Okay then, shall we move on? Hopefully you've all got a nice, neatly laid out value scale now. It really does help to have it laid out like carefully like this, because you know you can really see what value you need at what point. Okay, so it's there is method to the madness. It's not just for its own sake. I'm going to bring back up the main screen now, with the palette a little bit smaller in the corner. Probably won't need to go full screen on the palette again, I don't think now. And here is the reference. Oh, Ange wants in. Come on then, little man. Yeah, I know. I'm a bit busy though. So the first thing we want to do is prepare the panel. If you've done workshops with me before, you'll be used to this. So if you haven't, I'll take you through it nice and slow. First off, linseed oil. I use cold pressed because I think it's better quality, but actually I don't know the science behind it, I must be honest. And if you have refined, I'm sure that will be fine. So I'm pouring in a bit of linseed oil into my little jar. And then for my solvent, I use this pure gum turpentine. So it's not refined. It actually smells nice. If you like that kind of thing. I know a lot of people, it gives you headaches and stuff. Just a couple of drops of that. I wouldn't say that's a 50-50 mix. It's like somewhere between the two. But if you don't put any terps in, if you don't cut it with terps or Gamsol or sans soda or whatever solvent you like to use, then it will just take a really long time to dry. So what I tend to do is, for the first layer of medium, which we're going to paint onto the panel, I'll use a bit of terps with it, a bit of solvent. And then for layers after that, I use just oil, very, very thinly. Okay. And it takes a little bit, I mean, the quantities that I'm mixing here aren't exact. It's never exactly the same when I do it either. I don't think it's too crucial that it's exact, as long as you've got a bit of both, probably slightly more oil than solvent. I think it's personal as well, like the quantities. I don't think there's any substitute for trying it out a few times and finding what, depending on the substrate that you're painting on, depending on what you're most comfortable with. So this is an Ampersand gesso board, 8x10. I'm going to get a rubbish brush. This is a Rosemary's, really rubbish. And cover the surface of the panel. I'm not throwing it on, it's not like really, really thick, but I want to make sure that there are no skips and that the panel is covered. We're going to wipe this back because we want it to be very, very thin. If you end up with too much on here, one, your paint will slide all over the place and you'll have trouble getting opaque paint down, and two, it will just take forever to dry. So I look slightly to one side so I get some reflected light on the panel so I can see that I've covered it all. And then clean bit of kitchen roll. This is what I use, or a cloth would be fine, and wipe most of it off. I'd go as far as to say if you're not sure, it's better to wipe off too much than not enough. You just want it to help the paint brushes glide. Okay. And then I'm going to use whatever brush feels right to you for this. I always use this one. It's a very cheap, flat synthetic, about 1/4 inch, which I find works pretty well. I get a little bit of the medium on it and then wipe as much of it off as I possibly can. And I generally like to draw out with a fairly light value, so I'm going to use a 6. Okay, so the first thing to do is to lay out the grid, because obviously the reference is gridded, right? So measure this if you want to. You can do it by eye or you can measure it. If you want to measure it, if I'm measuring, the way I would do it is this. So we're going to divide each side into 4. So I want like 5, 2.5, 7.5, and then up the side I'll go 2, 4, 8, 6. 8 is the far edge. Now, by all means, measure the other side and actually draw the grid with your ruler. There's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I like to do it this way, as I've probably explained a few times before, because I like the practice. So this is like a breathing lines practice. Basically, I line it up. I've got very light pressure on the brush. You know, it's wobbly kind of. Line it up at the top, rest it on, and then going from the shoulder down. Try and stay aware of the whole panel at the same time, which helps you get it more even and central. And just let it glide down. It also takes a bit of practice. If you try and do it like this, you won't get a very good line. You draw from the shoulder. So when I'm doing these lines, I'm trying to stay aware of the space on either side of them rather than watching the line itself. This is all value 6. I do sometimes go a little bit awry on the horizontals, though, I must admit. But by all means, draw this whole grid out with a ruler, by all means. Don't feel that you're like any less of an artist or anything because you do that. Artists have been doing that for hundreds and hundreds of years. Doing small drawings and then gridding them up larger is no different. And if you've ever painted a mural, which I used to do a long time ago for a living, there is no other way to do it. You know, when you're painting that big, you simply can't get anything even anywhere near right without a grid. It's something several meters across and high. Okay, so let me know when you're ready to go with your panel. Oh no, what your linseed oil bottle? It does sometimes. The linseed oil will polymerize around the cap, and it will get very tight. You could attempt warming it a little bit, perhaps, depending on what it's made of. If you've got a metal bottle and a plastic cap, if you warm the cap, sometimes that will do it. Like run it under a hot tap or something, because the plastic will expand faster than the glass. Okay, so I'm still going to do all of the drawing out with the value 6, and you can see, like, my brush is pretty sharp. It's pretty flat. Yeah, great. Get him on the job. Very wise. This is what I call a chisel flat, because it looks like a chisel when you've got paint on it. It goes very, very flat. So the first thing we want to do, we're going to work from the general to the specific. So we want to get the highest point of the composition. And the highest point is the top of the lemon. And it comes in this square here at the top of the lemon. So we want to judge the distance, like how far from here to here is the top of the lemon. And I would say I would do this by eye, and I would say it's about there. That's about the top of the lemon. And the lowest point of the composition, now obviously we have got the fold of the cloth here, but because that's just a straight line, I'm not going to bother so much with the actual drawing out of that. The lowest point of the composition is actually this bay leaf. The lowest part of this bay leaf which is going to be just a little bit to the left. And about down to the left of the central vertical, and about down to there. Pat, let me know when you've got your linseed oil sorted out, because I'm worried now. So that's the highest and the lowest point. The furthest right is the furthest right point of the lemon, and so we're looking at the whole thing. We're not looking at just one particular element. And that's going to be about here. And then the furthest left point is the biggest bay leaf. Like, how far does it go over? Like between this line here and the edge. About kind of 2/3 of the way, and a little bit down from. I'm looking at the point of this bay leaf and putting a note where the point of that bay leaf is. I would estimate it about there. So those 4 points give us basically the extent of the composition of the stuff that we need to draw out. Okay, so you want to then start to break down the forms within that a little bit. Phew, I'm glad to hear that, Pat. So the next form I want to make is the whole of the lemon. So we've got the top of the lemon and we've got the furthest right point of the lemon. The furthest left point is just a little bit to the side of, to the left of the central vertical. This is just a really good place, a way to make sure that you get everything like bang on in the right place. And the lowest point of the lemon is obscured a little bit by that twig, but let's say we'll use that twig as pretty much the twig of the bay leaf is pretty much the bottom of the lemon. So we put it about there. So we can see now at the shape where the lemon is going to fit. Okay. And it can really help you to get this shape right, to look at, we're going to block in the lemon now, to look at where the outline of the lemon cuts the lines of the grid. So at this corner, you can see that there's a little bit of background just in the corner, so it cuts the grid about there. Down here, on the bottom, the outline of the lemon, outer edge of the lemon cuts this vertical about there. There's a little triangle you can see to the back of it, you know. It's a little bit more difficult to see over this side, but it looks to me like it pretty much cuts through these two grid lines where they join. And the same down here, it pretty much cuts through the joining point of these two grid lines. So once you have those in, it's like it's difficult to go wildly wrong from there. You know. Then you can start to basically just join up these. I'm going to do, like, the top of the lemon is kind of, it's flattish across the top. I've gone a little bit high there probably. So I'm doing this with straight lines, light pressure. I'm not pressing down with the brush. I'm not doing that. You know, I'm just touching like this. Touching and then letting it move. And obviously can't see all of the lemon, but. And over this side, you have the little nub. And that changes what happens over here. So it goes up a little, and then the nub comes in about here. So I want to get an idea into the outline of where that nub comes. And you can see a bit of the bottom edge of the lemon here coming around towards the twig at the bottom. So that's pretty much made up of straight lines. Okay. So you want to be able to see a little corner shape here between the grid and the edge of the lemon, and a little one here between the grid and the edge of the lemon. It pretty much crosses these two grid lines here and crosses these two. And if your highest, your lowest, your furthest left and your furthest right are reasonable, then you'll get pretty close to shape of the lemon. So you can see, because you can see a bit of the nub here kind of straight on, the lemon is at a diagonal, you know, so it's slightly foreshortened. So then we want to be putting in the bay leaves. Now, personally, the way I would approach something like this is to put in like the tip of for each leaf, put in the tip, and then find the part where at the end of the leaf where it joins the twig that then joins the branch. So this leaf ends right on the central horizontal, about halfway through there, about halfway across here. So I can pretty much draw a line between these points, and that's going to give me the center of that leaf. Just helps you to orientate things. And then if I look at where it crosses the grid lines, there, you know, you can build up a pretty accurate drawing pretty quickly this way. And then underneath here. And with, you know, other basic drawing skills like judging angles. A good way to think about the angles of lines is to compare them to the hands of a clock. I mean, basically anything which is going to help you get a more accurate drawing, don't be afraid to use it, I feel. So again, once you've got your two endpoints and you've marked out where the leaf crosses the grid lines, then it's much easier to draw in. So don't worry about the twig now. We're just, you know, the twig is not really that important. We're looking for the form of the leaves. So I'll show that again on this next bay leaf above. So I'm looking for the point of this leaf, and I'm comparing it to where does it sit in this square? How far down from the horizontal is it, and how far in from the vertical? It's not halfway across horizontally. It's a bit less, so it's going to be probably about here. And where that leaf ends, before it has a little twig bit that joins the main twig, is a little bit to the left of this point. It's about here. There's a slight curve to the line that joins them, but if you can do grid lines like this, then, you know, a line has to start somewhere and it has to end somewhere. You can put it on the start point, look at where you want it to go, and just drag. Remember the quality of the line that we were trying to get when we, in the first couple of sessions when we were working with the charcoal. You can get that same quality with paint if you want to. So then where does the outer edge of this leaf, where does it cross the grid lines? Well, it crosses this one here, slightly below the point. A little bit below the point. You're always looking for relationships. And it crosses this one just a little bit above this leaf, about there. So then you can start to figure out where these lines go, and then join them to the back. All the same stuff we've already been practicing with our drawing accuracy. But it's important that we get things in the right place, because when we hit the values right and the drawing is right as well, then the magic starts to happen. So this bottom leaf here, and it looks difficult, right? That's an awkward shape. And I guarantee you, if you tried to just draw that shape, your mind would try and make a leaf out of it. It's a little bit like the values on the cloth. Your mind will interfere and try and make a leaf out of it. So we're going to be really careful with this one, okay? We want to find the point where it leaves the twig. It's a little bit down from the central horizontal, and it's just about on the edge of the lemon, so it's going to be about there. That's about the point where this leaf leaves the edge of the twig. I actually think my point here is too high, that should be about halfway down there. The lowest point of the leaf that we've already put in, it should be about halfway down. So I'll make that little correction. And then I want the point of the leaf, which is very, very slightly up. Just think about the relationships, nothing else. It's very slightly up and to the left, very slightly of the lowest part of the leaf. And then I'm going to join them with two lines that form a slight curve like that. Which is going to give me the orientation of the leaf, okay? And then where does it cross these grid lines? Thankfully, we've got quite a few. So it crosses the central horizontal just to the left of where it starts, and then it crosses again, pretty much on the edge of the lemon. And underneath, down here, it crosses just about there. So then looking at the relationships, what happens between this point and where the leaf starts is basically a straight line. And that will help you get that angle right. Otherwise, I pretty much guarantee that you would be painting leaf. So now we want to see just the abstract shapes and how they join. So the end of this leaf here, there is no point. You cannot see a point on the end of that leaf. It's just a diagonal that goes up at that angle and stops well before it gets to the central horizontal. So then it needs to match up with this point and this point, so it goes up. And this way you'll be able to get, if you look at just relationships, you'll be able to get a pretty accurate drawing of that leaf, because it's drastically foreshortened and it's pretty tricky otherwise. Actually, I think that's not the true point. This line actually goes a little bit more like over there. So we just, we're really taking our time to make sure we put these things in the right place. It really does make a difference to the form, to how you feel the form. So the last leaf, I'm just going to be looking at where it crosses the others. So it crosses that leaf there. It comes back and joins the twig around here. It crosses the outline of this big bay leaf about there. And then it comes back to here. So I've got two lines here. And then it goes up a little, across, and then down. And that's really all I can see of that leaf. So I'm going to pause now, and you let me know when you're kind of caught up to the point where I'm at now. So I've got the lemon blocked in, and I've blocked in each of the 4 leaves. Trying to be very careful about their shape. These are mostly straight lines that I'm drawing with, though, notice. I'm not putting detail in, and I'm mostly drawing with straight lines, making sure that things cut the grid lines at the right point. This is how you'll nail the drawing. It basically is joining the dots. We're seeing the whole thing as 2-dimensional shape and just judging relationships between shapes. It might not be perfectly accurate, but you'll get really close this way. So who would have thought, a quick value study of a lemon. We're an hour and a half in, and we're still drawing it out. but we're also doing an awful lot of work. We already have our values mixed and ready to go. So if our drawing is accurate, we're going to put notes of the light and shadow next, once we've got, you know, the plane changes of the cloth in. We'll put notes for light and shadow, the modeling factors of the lemon, and then we just need to pick up the right value and put it in the right place. And the thing should work. So with a strong foundation like this, you know, it gives you a much better chance of a strong finish. Just getting the basics right. And it's amazing how if you just get these basics right, you know, a lot of the time, it can be surprisingly impressive. And it's like this structure, this foundation, it carries the expression. And if you just have expression without anything to carry it, then it just doesn't work anything like as well. But if you can marry expression with a really strong foundation, a strong scaffolding, if you like, then that's, to me, that's really when the magic starts to happen. Not looking for symmetry at all. You don't want symmetry. None of these shapes, these are all organic shapes. They're not symmetrical. You want accuracy. Absolutely, you want accuracy. The lemon is not symmetrical and none of the leaves are either. You want an accurate shape, simplified but accurate. So these leaves are not symmetrical, you know, they're organic. The bay leaves. So definitely go for accuracy. The main thing to make sure with the leaves is that your start point and your end point are in the right place and that they cut the grid lines at the right point and then join those reference points. Same with the lemon. If you get your highest, lowest, furthest left and furthest right, then look at where the outline cuts the grid, join those points, and it will be in the right place. You can always refine the edges in the drawing later in a painting, much easier than you can with charcoal, to be fair. What we're looking for here for today is the right value in the right place. I hope that makes sense. These leaves are absolutely not symmetrical, and I think if you force them to be symmetrical, you're forcing a schema on them, and they'll look a little unnatural. Because we tend to, I mean, this is the difficulty with painting something foreshortened like this, drawing something very foreshortened, is that you will, in your mind, a leaf is like this. And that's what you'll always try and draw. You know, your mind will always make you try and draw that shape. So you'll try and impose, your mind will impose that on this shape here, you know. The mental schema of a leaf. How are we doing? Okay, let me know when you're ready to move on, and we'll do the next bits of drawing out, put our background in. Okay, great. So I want to fairly simply note in the plane change of the cloth at the bottom here. And hopefully you can see it's a gradual curve, you know, because the cloth has weight. So we're looking for really where it changes from the shadow to the light. And it's just a little way, about that far, I would say, just a little way before this bottom horizontal. Obviously, it's not going to be a line in the finished painting because it's a gradation, you know. And we have been practicing our gradations with other things, so we're going to be doing it here as well. And I know that you'll be extremely tempted to, the first thing you would want to do next is put in the back. But I want you to start thinking in terms of light and shadow, but as abstract shapes, okay? So actually the next strongest division, if you squint down, is between the shadow at the back here and the cloth in light. And that is happening just below the central horizontal, about there. So that again is going to be a gentle gradation. It's going to be a very soft edge, but we'll mark it in anyway. Okay. And then over this side of the lemon, we want the cast shadow, which is going to come down to here. And you can see the curve of the cast shadow, it comes up a little bit. It's a bit of a slant there. It comes down here up to there. We're going to draw that in as if it was an object. And the back edge of the cast shadow is just very slightly above the central horizontal, and it's slightly higher on the right than it is on the left. Draw it in as an object. You know, what makes form is light and shadow. Not getting the back edge, that's not going to be form. That's not going to show form. And I also want you might be tempted normally just to kind of whack this in, but I want you to draw the shadow of this leaf with the same focus that you actually draw the leaf. So the shape actually ends. The point is it joins the leaf here. Okay, look at where it cuts the central vertical. And look at where it cuts the shadow of the twig. And it's a little bit to the right of the back of the leaf, and below it. Not quite halfway over from the left to right of this square. It's about there. That's the back point of the shadow. And then you can join these up. But it comes out to the right of that point here. So what you have is almost like a rhombus shape. Draw that shadow in as if it's a thing. And the same with this one. Although it's really thin, it almost joins up with this leaf, but not quite. So it goes away from this leaf right at its lowest point where it touches the cloth, and then it goes horizontally, very thinly across, but draw it as a shape. I really want you to think strongly in terms of light and shadow. And cast shadows are extremely important in showing form, showing light and shadow. Oh, all right, we'll put the back edge in. So the back edge is about a third of the way up between the central horizontal and the next one up. Okay. Mine's a little bit high. The reason I know it's a little bit high is because it should be closer to this leaf. It should actually be about there. So we're always looking for relationships. Don't just try and look where something is and then try and put it in, you know, almost guaranteed that you get things wrong if you do it that way. Relate it to something. Where does it cut the leaf? Where does it cut the lemon? Where does it cut the lines of the grid? Always be trying to relate things to something rather than just winging it. And I'm also gonna rough in the twig. Now that we've got everything else in, it's easier to see where the twig goes. So it joins this highest leaf here, and it cuts this leaf right about down here. And it has kind of two parts to it like that. So I'm just going to rough this in, and it joins this leaf here. I'm not too bothered about, you know, getting this exactly right at this point. I just want it to be somewhere near. That's going to be our lowest value there, the twig. Personally, I probably wouldn't even bother putting that in at this stage, you know, because it's not going to show us form. It's compositionally important, you could say, but it's not going to show us form, you know. So I'm going to change the reference image that I've got on the stream now for another one. Because I want to show you the modeling factors. First, I think what I'll do is I'll show you it close up. So I'm going to do a quick screen share now. At least as soon as I get this together, I will do you a quick screen share. I didn't mean to share that. I meant to share this. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what's going on here on the lemon itself. This is just on the lemon itself, the different modeling factors. So here's our core shadow. This is the darkest part of the shadow here, drawn out, divided out. And you can see that's pretty much the same value as the background. There's another bit of it down here as well. Okay. This is our halftone. Lighter part of the shadow where it's starting to turn towards the light. And in there we've got the reflected light here. And this is the dark part of the light. And then the lighter part of the light, and then the highlight. So we've got some distinct areas there to deal with, you know. Because the light is slightly in front of the lemon. This area that I'm calling halftone, you could say it's still shadow. It's kind of between. It's probably a little bit closer to shadow than light, but we need to designate these areas. It just helps us to split them up and think about what's happening to the light there, you know. So this small area here, the core shadow, is definitely the darkest part of the shadow. I was in two minds about how I was going to split this up, because I did think that I could make all of this kind of shadow as well, a lighter part of the shadow, that this area would be the half tone, and then we would divide this into dark light and light light. You could do it that way. The main thing is that you build a schema for the modeling factors and you figure out what values you want in those places, okay? So I'm going to change the reference photo now to be that one. Obviously that image is a lot smaller, so I'll have to make it bigger. There, just so you can see, like when we're drawing this bit out, you know, it's important that we put the right values in the right place here. So we want to actually paint them as things, divide this up in the same way as it's divided there. So we've got our small area of core shadow. And if you get these right, it will pretty much create that little nub. So the bottom part of the triangle actually meets up with the nub there. And then there's another small area of core shadow down here. Now I've tried to follow value changes on the lemon itself, which is meant for a slightly crazy division here, but you know, look for where these things cut things that you've already got. Where does it cut the edge of the lemon? Where does this cut this leaf? You know, the divisions are slightly artificial, but they will help you get the values right. We're looking at modeling factors, at areas of the form, and deciding what value needs to go there. So I'm looking at the photo. When I drew this out in Photoshop, I looked at the photo and I decided where the value changes were. Obviously, it's a gentle gradation from one to another. But if you keep pretty closely to these shapes, it will work. Rather than making them vague. And to nail these values, you know, usually I find it takes a little bit of adjustment once you've got it in there. But what we're going to be looking to create is, by the time this painting is finished, is we want to create a gradation of values across the lemon as fine as the ones that you created on the eggs, but with paint. But with paint. So this here is the darkest part, the core shadow, where very little light is getting in, these two little shapes here. This is like a half tone. It has some light, it's beginning to turn to the light. This is a darker part of the light. We're kind of in the light here. This is a darker part of the light, and this is a lighter part of the light. And I've selected values to go in each of these areas, the 7, a 5, a 4, a 5 for the reflected light. And the core shadow, actually you can't see it, it was too small for me to put the number in, but it's a 3. The core shadow is a 3. And the highlight here is a 9. So you can see now we have these things laid out here. You know, we have them laid out. So we should be able to put this stuff in. I think probably we're coming up to 2 hours now, just before. So let's have a break at this point, 10-minute break. And then for the last hour, we'll put the values in. We're going to start with the background and then work towards the lemon. Okay, so let's have a quick break now. Seems like a good point to have a quick stop. If you have any questions about any of this so far, then pop them in the chat box. Okay, how are we doing? Are we ready to move on? Yep, chat's working, Susan. I think we have lots of busy people painting at the moment. So I'm going to switch over to another reference image now. The other one with the value number superimposed. We'll come back to this one. Okay. So this is, you'll be used to this by now, hopefully from the egg, you know. So this is basic values and target values and where we want them. So I like to start with these kind of studies. I like to start with the background and paint the stuff around the main subject. And that's largely because it helps you to key the values. So when you come in to paint the actual object itself, you have something to relate it to. So you can see, I mean, obviously we have an independent check of our values with the Munsell scale and the values that we've assigned. Now, all of these values I found the same way as I have all of the previous ones by spotting the photograph with the little eyedropper tool in Photoshop. Okay. So you could certainly manipulate these values if you wanted to, but we're going for accurate values from what we have in the photo this time. Okay, so we know that we want back here, we want a 1.5. So I would be inclined to use for this, it's up to you what you use, but personally I'd be inclined to use, this is a filbert, Cornelissen filbert. Now the size in inches is going to be more reliable for me to tell you than any other way. Like across the ferrule, this is about 1/3 of an inch across the ferrule, okay? But you can use any kind of brush you want for this. I mean, you can use a flat or something like that. But I want to work in a little bit of expression, okay? So one of the nice things about having an accurate drawing and good values is it gives us a little bit more freedom. So I know back here I want a 1.5 and over here I want a 3. So I'm going to take this brush. I'm going to get a bit of oil on it first. But then, crucially, you have to do this. I'm going to wipe that oil off. It helps to work the brush in, okay? And I know that I want a 1.5. Well, here's my 1, and here's my 2. So I just mix something a little bit between those and just put a stroke down. It looks incredibly dark, right? Because all we have to relate it to at the moment is a white panel. And I'm going to wipe the brush off, and I know over this side I want a 3. Now 1, 2, 3, we have the 3 already mixed. Just pick up a bit of the 3 and put that over there. It also looks really, really dark. Which it is, you know, which it does want to be, you know. I'm going to get another brush, similar size and shape to that one. I'm using a hog, you know, again, you can use whatever you're most comfortable with. And the value that I want here on the fold of the cloth is about a 5, okay? I'm going to get a little bit of oil on that one too and then wipe it right off. We're not painting it all in, we're just making notes, right? A value 5. Pretty much guarantee that you would go lighter than that if you were just painting it. Across the top surface, the top plane here, I want an 8, which I've got here. Make sure you pick up the right ones. 8. You know, even that looks dark against the white of the panel. And for the cast shadow here, I want a 2.5. So I'm going to get my darks brush again. And here's my 2, there's my 3. Between the two of these, I want a 2.5. And if you want to check these exactly, the nice thing about the Cantore scale is that it has the half steps here. Or you can use, if you have the big book, you can use that. So this would be like 2.5 would be here. So if you want to check it to make sure, but if you have your value scale mixed out like this, you'll be fine. So the 2.5 is here, and also in the cast shadow here. You know, so those are the target values that we want in these areas. Okay. So I'm going to start with my 1.5, get a bit more of a loaded brush, and I'm going to paint this in here, but I'm going to do it fairly roughly. Now at first when this goes on, you need to put it on thick enough that it covers, because if you paint it out too much, you need to keep on loading your brush to make sure you've got enough on there. If you paint it out too much, it will go transparent over the white panel, and you'll end up with a slightly higher value than you want. We want a 1.5. Okay, so I'm going careful when I get to the leaf, trying not to destroy the drawing. Okay. And if you want to check what you're getting there, you can either get 1.5 from the big book value scale and check it, you know, squint down, or you can use the Cantore scale. 1.5 is here. .5, and check it that way, and squint down. It's really, really important to check what you get on here. Don't just rely on having the right value here and then sticking it on, because things can change when they hit the panel. So over this side, I want a 3. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm just going to paint it in. Like I'm trying to go up to the edge of my drawing, but I'm also, you'll notice my brush strokes are going in all directions. I'm finding the edge of the drawing and doing that carefully. And then when I get into space, I'm going in all directions with the brush, so that I get a kind of a bit of an atmosphere back there. But I did also like the way that Titi in her drawing of the eggs had like a down stroke. I mean, you can do that as well. I've seen Anthony Wychulis, who's really good teacher. He also has an exercise that he does where he takes a study and he paints it, and only with down strokes. You know, that's an interesting way to work as well. So then we want something in between the two to match them up. We've got a 1.5 here and a 3 there. So the easiest thing to go is just to go with the 2 and paint that in between the 2. And the value difference may not be very obvious at this point, because we're still, remember, when we look at this, we're relating everything to the white panel. So until we get the white panel covered, it's very difficult to see the finer values. Everything just looks dark, basically. So I'm going carefully around the edge, making sure everything is in the right place still. And allowing the brush to have a little bit of texture. Check my value over here that I'm getting a 3. That's here. It's pretty good, maybe slightly dark, but it has a bit of chroma, so it's kind of hard to tell. Great, made a start. So this bit can actually go pretty quick, you know. Here we wanted a 2.5, which is between our 2 and our 3. So we can fill this area in now. Up to the edge. The leaves, it's going to be the same back here. Make sure you don't paint over your leaves though. What can happen sometimes as well, I'm just mentioning it because I'm noticing it's happening here. If you put a value down that has a little bit of white in it, especially at the bottom of the range, it can go down more opaquely and actually a little bit darker, you know. So the cast shadow also is a 2.5. Cast shadow of the lemon. I'm just going to paint the whole thing as a you know, a block of the 2.5. And this space in between is very slightly lighter, you know. So I would be inclined to pick up like a 5 there and put a 5 against this here. It will look dark, but it will look lighter when you paint it in. And then make sure you get the edge of the lemon right, and then just paint it up into the background there. Some bits, like little bits like that, generally speaking, I'll do a little bit on the fly and I'll correct them, you know, once we're a little bit further through. That's really good to hear, Susan. Okay, so we're starting to get some stuff covered now. Getting on to the exciting bit. I'm going to paint this down a little bit to where it joins the lighter value. So next I'm going to put in the value 8 across here, across the top of the cloth. You'd probably be inclined to put this in a lot lighter. You may want to lighten it at some point, but remember, values is all about relationships. So we need to make sure that our highest value is right here on the highlight of the lemon. So we're going up to a 9 there. So 5, 6, 7, 8. Paint around the cast shadow shapes. Treat the cast shadows as things, not just a smudge of a darker value, indiscriminate value. Treat them as shapes. Get the shape right if you can, and get the value right. And your painting will thank you for it, I promise. It will say thank you very much for not messing up my cast shadows. Careful edges around the edges of the leaves. I'm just going to paint up to that area there for now. Just paint this as a block. Anywhere there isn't a cast shadow or there isn't a leaf or a bit of lemon, just do it as value 8 for now. We're doing this in a really simplified way to start off with. We will want to modulate some areas of it, but for now, I want you to just nail these values as blocks. That shadow, so I'm going around the shadow shape there, the cast shadow shape. Not painting into it at all, around this cast shadow. And in terms of the directions of the strokes here, you could do them all as down strokes, you can do them as sideways strokes, you know, however you want to do it. But try to make sure, have an eye on the drawing, you know. When this cast shadow comes in, remember that it's higher at the right. You know, this is important because the direction of the cast shadow shows the direction of the light. So the direction of this cast shadow ties in with what value goes where on the lemon itself. So I want to paint in these other 2 cast shadows here for now. But they're a bit lighter. They're lighter, they're darker than the value we have here, but they're lighter than this. So you can start to make some decisions based on what you have down. So I would, for these areas here, these cast shadows, I would go 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because they're a little lighter. There's a bit more light in them. For now, just painting the shape. Obviously, we don't want them to be hard edged, and we will sort that out whilst the paint is still wet. But for now, we'll just paint them in. 4 is maybe a bit dark. Maybe between a 4 and a 5. That long one there. But can you see it? Like, I don't know if you feel this now, but the light is beginning to appear already. So down here, we're a 5. I'm going to finish off this area of the cloth. Some parts of it obviously are lighter, some parts of it are darker, but for now I just want to paint it in. I just want to get that value in. There's an average. You know, you'd be really tempted to go in much lighter with this, like, you know, a 6 or a 7, even if you're thinking white cloth and just kind of judging it by eye. But go in with the 5. So there's a definite plane change here, right? You can feel that now. A definite change between this value here and this one here. Let me adjust the exposure of the camera to make sure these values appear right on the screen. It's very difficult to set up the exposure of the camera at the beginning when there's nothing actually on the panel. I think our cast shadow, which was 2.5, it's obscured by the twig, but it needs to come under the lemon a little bit there. So I don't know about you, but if you squint down, we're starting to see like there's a suggestion of light in there, strong value shapes. So I want you to tell me when you've got these blocked in. I mean, literally block them in. Don't worry about them too much being perfect or anything. Don't do any edge handling or anything like that. Just get them in for now. We're about to do a bit of edge handling with them now. So tell me when you're ready. And we're going to start doing some adjustment and edge handling on these values. We creating the environment first, and then we're going to paint the objects into the environment, which is actually really good practice when you're working from life as well. It keeps you from making too many value mistakes. Just trust the values and whack them down. I'm very thirsty. I'm just going to grab some water. So if you squint right down, you should hopefully see, you know, the similarity, broadly speaking, in the value blocks between the photo and between the photo and what we have on the panel now. Thanks, Marilyn. What I don't want to do is steam ahead and start doing things before you're ready. So do let me know when you feel it's okay to move on. Incidentally, this, which I did as part of that little color mixing thing, was done exactly in this way, exactly, except with color, obviously. I would encourage you as well to, I don't know really the best way to describe this, but be careful about the edges of the objects, but be fairly loose elsewhere. You can afford to be pretty brushy and expressive in the rest of the painting. Like I've got brush strokes showing here and here. You know, like along this division here, I've got brush strokes showing, and here I've got brush strokes showing, all in the background. You know, you can be pretty loose if your values are good and your drawing is good. As long as, but I've been very careful on the edges of the forms to try and keep those in the right place, you know. So if you try to paint these as perfect shapes, it may end up looking a little dead. I don't know what that means, Junior. Will it go to the over easy? Has the spell check just messed with you? Possibly. So what I'm basically saying is to get these accurately in the right place, but don't be obsessed with trying to get a perfectly flat finish. That's the enemy of life in painting. It really takes all the life out of it. You want to get the right values in the right place, but allow the brush to speak a little at the same time. I have a feeling eventually this value here might need to come down a little bit. Made it look way over easy. But it really is just throwing the values down in the right shapes. You know, we've got the values like set out here. If the drawing is accurate, then you're putting the values down in the right shapes. You will get, if you use these values and the drawing is good, you will get a feeling of light and shadow. Okay, let's do a little bit of some simple edge handling, okay? So I'm going to start off with my light brush with this plane change here. So here we've got a 5 and here we've got an 8, okay? So an easy way to start working a plane change there. So here's our 5, which is the front, and here's our 8. Sorry, there's our 8. So if I mix something between the 6 and the 7, so I'm going to be going for like about a 6.5. And start to brush that in between them. It starts to soften that edge and it starts to turn. Go more towards the 7. Can you see that? I didn't do any blending or anything there. So if I mix between the 7 and the 8, so I'm like about a 7.5, and work the top part here. The values are doing all the work. You see, I'm painting this roughly. But can you see how easy it is to start making a curve, you know? So if I pick up a mix between the 5 and the 6, get something like about a 5.5, and bring that in the bottom. It's better if you paint it roughly than if you try and do it really exact. And suddenly this feels like it's curving. Oh, the egg. Yeah, that egg was, I mean, that egg took 2.5 hours, you know, I think something like that, or an hour and a half or something like that. Sorry, I didn't realize you were talking about the egg. And if you can allow yourself to paint these values slightly roughly, without being too much of a perfectionist on the finish, you will get more life in your painting. Where we want to go really overboard on the perfectionism is on the gradations of the fine gradations of the form here. You know, you can allow yourself to get away with quite a lot. Yeah, but Mariana, your egg was brilliant. It was brilliant. I mean, eggs are not easy. They're not easy to paint at all. Okay. So if you think about this as the way that we turned the form here, you think of it as almost as separate planes. Like you've got a difference of a value 5 to a value 8. So this plane is going in, let me try and show this with a ruler. This plane is going in like this direction. So then we paint a slightly lower value, which is going like this, makes it appear like this. And then a slightly lower value, somewhere in between the two, makes it seem like it's a plane change like that. And then another one in between that. And we've got all the values here. And you're almost painting it like a rigid series of plane changes, just like we do when we break down a form and simplify it into straight lines. We're doing the same thing with the values, but because it's painted fairly loosely, you get the feeling of a gradual curve. So I've got my dark brush and I want to start affecting the value change here. So I've gone from a value 8 to a value 1. So I'm up here, value 8. And I've got like a value 1.5. That's a long way to go. I'm going to pick up a little bit of 5 and paint it in between. And just paint it in a little bit. Just enough to give the impression of a softer edge there. If I wanted to soften between the 8 and the 5, then obviously I would pick up something in between. You know, get my light brush, pick up the 7. And paint 7 in between the 8 and the 5. Okay. Yeah, I'm not surprised, Mariana, but it was very finely finished, that egg. So, now the cast shadows are interesting because a rule of cast shadows is that the further away from the object that casts them they go. So for this shadow, the further it goes away from the leaf, the softer it gets. The same with this one. The further it goes away from the leaf, the softer it gets. And this one too. So these two cast shadows we used like about a 4, I think it was, about a 4.5. So we're between, say, a 4.5 here and an 8. So if I pick up, I'm going to get my light brush and I'm going to pick up a 6, which is somewhere in between the two. And I'm going to start to paint that in a little bit. to the right hand side of this cast shadow and around the edge of this one, but just around the edge where it moves further away, okay? Don't worry, we're going to soften these edges a little bit more than this, but already that's having an effect. So this is with a value 6. There's not very much paint, and I'm bringing it in where the shadow is further away from the object. Not where it's right next to it, because it gets gradually softer as it moves further away. I'm going to hang on a minute. You tell me when you've got that in, because we're going to do some softening now of those cast shadows. Getting that effect of the cast shadows right, the edge being harder where it's closer to the object and then softer as it moves further away, is really key to making them feel like cast shadows. Really key. Even if they're not that accurately painted, they will work if you get that softening, if the values are good and you get that softening effect in. Let me know when you're up to this point, because I'm going to do a little bit of softening on those now. It's good to do a little bit of edge handling at this stage, even though we're going to work like another layer on this, because those edges are easier to work when the paint is wet. Otherwise, you almost have to paint another layer in order to do them. But don't be too, I've been pretty rough with this. You just need to get the paint down there for now. Don't try to finish it. Just get that value in there to show that there's like a band, if anything, really, of a lighter value as that cast shadow moves away. We want to get to a stage today where we've got all of the values blocked in, and most of the background is working well enough that we can, the next session that we work on this, we're really going to concentrate on the fine values in this form here and really try and make that form feel solid and there in the painting. All of this stuff that we're doing now is the stage. This is the main actor here. So that's where we want to be focusing most of our time. But we want to make sure that this obeys the laws of light, that we create a feeling of light already there. So this is what I was talking about earlier on, where we can mix the right value on the palette, and then we can whack it down on the panel a lot more quickly, and more confidently. Whereas obviously when you're trying to approach this value of the shadow of the cloth here very gradually, like with the charcoal, and you don't use the value scale to make sure you get it right, then your brain will interfere. But it's white, it must be lighter than this, right? It must be lighter. No, this is the right value. So we'll check what we're getting. We're getting about a value 5 here. This is my value 5, looks good. I want about a value 8 up here. Here's my value 8. Looks good. I want a value 3 back here. Here's my value 3. That looks all right. I want a value 1.5 here. I suspect I'm going to need to darken that. It looks like that's not quite dark enough here. But I would be more inclined to do that with a glaze on the next stage, because it's dark enough to be able to make sense. Anybody else? How are we doing? Ready to do this next bit? There's actually not an awful lot to go now on this. This part goes pretty quickly. You do this like intensive sort of building up at the beginning. And then it makes this part easier. it's like with the chalk, the chalk and the charcoal. You're doing all of the mixing on the thing. Here we're doing the mixing in a different place. We're doing the mixing here and then applying it. Okay, I'm going to move on to a little bit of the edge handling now. Okay. So for this, I'm going to use a flat brush. Flat synthetic soft. You want a flat soft synthetic is best. You can use something like a hog if you wanted to, but it will just be a slightly rougher finish. If you've got something like this is a Winsor & Newton Scepter Gold flat synthetic. Works much better. Okay, dry. No paint on it, no oil, nothing. So say I want to soften this as it moves further away from this leaf. I'm going to hatch it across very, very lightly. Okay, this is where your pressure sensitivity comes in that you've been learning with your charcoal, right? And make the hatches slightly wider. I'm doing them all down as it moves further away, okay? Already you can see the effect is coming, and then wipe it off and then drag it across. And one drag should be enough. And you get a really nice, because we've already got the value down there, you get a really nice gentle gradation. Okay. Immediately, now that's starting to look like a cast shadow, and your brain is telling you something must be here to make that shadow. There must be something there. Similarly here, you know, I'll start on this shadow, I'll start hatching down really just a whisper, like we did with the charcoal, the lightest possible pressure on this side. And then as I move over, I do slightly bigger hatches, drag the paint a little bit more. It's still light pressure. And then pull it across the other way. I've lost the shape a little bit, but this is the shadow now. Your brain is telling you there must be something there for this shadow to exist. Same here. Lightest possible pressure. Think about your white chalk. Dragging down, make the drag slightly wider the further away you get. This is how you soften it more as it goes further away. This is a bigger shape, so it's probably going to need a couple of drags. And then pull it the other way. And I'm also going to, personally, I would like to soften that one too there. Drag down and then across. Now we've got shadows. I'm unhappy with the shape of this one here. I've lost the shape, so I'm going to edit it a little bit. Bring just with the value 8. And then drag it again. You could do a bit of messing about with this, but try not to do too much, because you can lose them if you're not very careful. Like this one here, my shadow has ended up too wide, so I'm picking up my value 8 and I'm going to paint either side of it to bring it in a little, narrow it down a little, and then I'll drag it again. Down. Just the gentlest pressure, and then really barely touching, just drag it across. You can get such fine effects this way. And this is where the pressure sensitivity of the charcoal starts to pay off. We're basically doing the same thing, but with a wet medium. How's that, all right? Now, I would propose that we put in the values on the lemon next and do the leaves last. Mostly because one of the leaves overlaps the lemon. So I'm going to bring up that earlier image that I had again with the modeling factors on it. So you can kind of see where things are going to go. So you need to use a brush that's appropriate for what you're trying to do. So I'm going to continue using hogs for the lemon, but I'm going much smaller now. Like this is 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to get a couple out, one for the light and one for the shadow. Much smaller because I've got smaller stuff to paint here and I want to be more exact. Okay. So the core shadow shape here is a value 3. It's almost the same as the background here. Both of these brushes I'm going to get a little bit of oil on first. It's almost the same value. It is pretty much the same value as the background. One dark, one light. 1, 2, 3, pick up my value 3. And that's this shape here. And paint it in opaquely. And there you basically got a lost edge. It disappears against the background. But here is interesting because you've got a lighter value here. So when you paint it in here, it shows up this edge. The right-hand edge of this shape shows up against that lighter value there. Bring it down to the cast shadow. We're just going to lay them in for now. First value is in. And then we go to value 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's this shape here. We're only going up at like a step. But this value is starting to show a little bit against the background there. And try to make sure as well that you don't have like little gaps between the values. Putting them up to each other. Not doing any edge handling, we're just putting the values in. Like I've got a little gap here that I don't want. So I'm going to get the darker value out again, the 3, and make sure that I get rid of that gap there because it's going to destroy the feeling of form. There shouldn't be light there. So then moving out, I'm going to go up to the light brush, the next brush, pick up the value 5. And that's this area, which I'm calling the reflected light here. Just paint them in as shapes for now. This part of the lemon. I have lost my drawing a little bit of my lemon. And at this point, it should start to show against the background. If it doesn't show against the background, then something is wrong with the values. Right? Because here we've got like about a value 3 or 2 or 3, and here we're a value 5. So that should show. I think it doesn't matter too much whether you, for this way of painting, whether you think of this as the halftone or the dark light, as long as the right value is in the right place. and you're thinking about, you know, why that value is that value there. And then still on the light brush, I'm just going to go in with the value 7 for the whole of the light. Now, obviously there's gradation in the light, which we're going to want to put in. But for now, I just want to paint it in as a value 7. So I'm trying to follow those shapes of the divisions that I have in that reference image. This is going to need to come up in value a little bit, I think. But let's paint it in for now and we'll see where we stand. And then the highlight there is a 9. We haven't gone up to our highest value yet. I'm going to get a clean brush for that actually, because I want that to stand out well. It's the same one of 1/4 inch hog I'm using here. Get a bit of oil on it and wipe it off. And I want like a nice clean value 9 in here for the highlight. Oops, didn't know that was going to come out so big. I'm good to, oh, I forgot it was a much bigger image. I'll have to resize this on the fly, sorry. So I think that the light side of the lemon is a little dark, but not by very much, not by very much. If you squint down now, squint right down, obviously it looks like incredibly simplified when you're looking at your painting, but if you squint right down, you should start to see the form coming. But actually, I think there's a whole lighter shape around the top and a little bit around here, which I think would be best done with an 8. So I'm actually I've run out of 8, so I'm going to mix them up quickly. Check it against my value scale. Always remember to check out what you're doing against your value scale. That looks good. Because I think if you paint in a shape which comes round the highlight and then up like this and round here, this is a value 8. I think that's going to bring that up. Which makes sense because the light is coming down here. So this kind of plane in the light area, the top half is going to be slightly lighter value. That makes more sense, I think. So I want you to get to this stage with the lemon Remember to squint right down, because your brain will interfere with what you see, and squinting is a way to short circuit that. Get your lemon to this point and then squint right down and tell me if you think there's anything you need to change. Remember to check the values. So I've got like about an 8 across the top here. This area is a 7. This area here. This part around here is 5. In here, which I'm calling the half tone for this one, we're a 4. That looks good. And then the deepest shadow is a 3. So check your values and tell me if you're happy that your values are right, if there's anything that you feel needs to change. There's the little plane change of the knob, obviously, but I don't mean that bit for now. We're going to put that in, but I want you to check the overall form. Remember to squint right down. And just pop a little, let me know in the chat if you think the values look okay on your study or if you think something needs to change. Just in terms of the main value blocks. Good. Marilyn, thank you. Don't forget to squint. And don't be too worried about, the edges and stuff like that at the moment. When you squint down, stand right back as well. I mean, don't just stand right next to it or sit or whatever you're doing. You need to be like across the room, get as far back from it as you can and squint down. I mean, these are old strategies. You'll have heard these 100 times. Squint, stand well back. These are ways of short-circuiting that stuff that we had with the cloth when your mind is telling you that it should be lighter because it's a white cloth, right? So it must be lighter. So these are strategies, I don't know if you've heard of like the black mirror, where people would get a sheet of like blackened glass with something black behind it, and then hold that, face away from their painting, and then hold that to check the values. We have an independent check here. We've got the Munsell scale to guide us to make sure that we're in the right kind of area. Looks like a fish. I dare you to put a little eye on it and some bubbles coming up into your background. I just dare you. Does it look like a round fish though, Mariana? Does it look like a solid fish? Or just an abstract fish shape? So the overall feeling that we're looking for in the light part of the lemon here is that it feels slightly darker in value than the light part of the cloth, because the cloth is white, okay? And the light is coming down like this. The lemon is not white, it's yellow. So the local value of the lemon is slightly lower. Yeah, a blowfish. A fat little fish. That's fine, because we haven't put in anything that's going to make it look lemony. What we want at the moment is just form. We just want light and form. Okay, so for each of these areas that are in there now, I'm going to take a value in between, and in the same way as we did here, when we were changing the planes and making a gradation. In the same way as we did with the cast shadows, just around the edge we painted a value that was in between. I'm going to start painting values in between. So here, working from the light to the shadow. So here I have an 8 and I'm going to a 5. So if I pick up somewhere between a 6 and a 7, so like a 6.5. Now be careful as you paint this in, and I'm going to go between these two. Try not to go into the light too much. I just want to create a slightly gentler gradation here between these two. Here we've got a 7 to a 5. So I'm going to go in with a 6 in between. It's a fairly small strip. It's barely the width of the brush, you know. Just starting to change the form a little bit. This guy came into my light a little bit too much there. I'm going to push that back a bit. So we're just starting to paint between these values, okay? So this is a 5 into a 4. This is a 5 into a 4. So remember, do this carefully though. Remember your charcoal, don't rush it. So between a 5 and a 4, I'm going to use my darker brush for this. 4.5. And just between these, try and keep the integrity of the shape. Just between these two, I'm going to paint the value in between. So what we're doing is we're just refining a little bit as we go. And then here we had a value 3 to a 4. So if I get a 3.5, which I mix between my 3 and my 4. And this doesn't go on the outside edge, just between those two there. I think this needs to come back a little lighter around here for me. So I'm going to go 6.5 and bring that in there. Remember, you have really, really fine control over the values at this point. You know, you're basically in complete control of what goes on. But also remember, when you start painting something else on, it mixes into wet paint. It mixes with what's already there. That felt like it was too dark, like more reflected light back down here. And I feel like squinting down, the light should come back over at the top a little bit. So I'm going to bring that light brush, pick up a 7 and bring this back a little way, slightly lighter there. We're not looking to finish it at this point. We're going to manage some gradations, you know, in other sessions. But and I'm going to bring 5 back here. We're going to manage, once this is kind of dried a little bit, we'll oil it out and do a little bit more on it. Yeah, I see a fish as well now. I do see a fish. So that was just the same thing as we did here, but on a smaller scale. And I also want to, you see the highlight? We've got a hard edge around the highlight. It wants to stay fairly hard, but not quite that hard. So I'm going to pick up some 8 and go just around the edge, just lightly, light pressure around the edge of the highlight, just to soften the edge of the highlight a little bit and knock it back. You know, now it's really starting to come alive. The lemon is almost done. Oh, just kicked my camera tripod. There we go. So the little area of the nub, you know, we're a value 4 here and it only barely just shows. So I think what will work really well there is if you pick up a 5 And there are really two planes. There's a plane across there. And I've picked up a 5 because by the time it mixes with the 4 that's already in there, it's going to end up as a 4.5. And then there's a plane coming down. It's enough to show the nub. And a little bit, and there's actually a bit of reflected light underneath as well. So I'm going to bring in a little bit down there, slightly lower value. And can you see how it creates the feeling of there being this little nub there? Because what we're painting is there's a bit more light falling on that part of the lemon because the plane changes. So you just bring up the value a tiny little bit. I don't know, it's starting to look a little bit less like a fish now. A bit disappointing. I kind of liked it being a fish. And I personally wouldn't bother with putting the dark detail in at this point, but you can if you want to. You know, there's just a couple of little marks is all it will take. I would be going in with like a value 1 for the little dark parts there, but I'm not going to put them in yet. I think it's better to put those in later. So we're getting an overall feeling of a value balance of light and shadow and form now. So let me know when you're, I'm worried that you're going to start trying to finish your lemon. Okay, so we're not trying to finish the lemon at this point. I do need to sort out my drawing a little bit though. We're not trying to finish it. We're just stopping at the point where we have a bit of a feeling of light and form. Because we're going to work on this some more and we're going to work these gradations. Don't forget, like with paint, we can carry on working over it with more layers, you know. So don't try to produce a finished painting at this point. We're blocking in. But if you stand back and you squint down, it should be starting to appear as a scene. A little lemon fish sitting on a cloth. So the only thing we need to do now is to block in the leaves, but I don't want to do those until you feel ready with your lemon, but I also don't want you to spend too long on the lemon. Don't try to perfect it at this point. Leave it with some mistakes, it's fine, because we're going to paint over it and we're going to manage some careful gradations on it when we come back to work on it some more. As long as you've got it covered and you've got the right values in the right places and the form is beginning to turn, that's as far as you need to go with it. So let me know when you're ready and we'll block in the leaves. Don't forget, we've got, basically you've got as many sessions as you want to spend on this. And what I want you to do is to use the values on the lemon as a marker, as a starting place. And then really develop up that form as far as you feel able to take it. But not now, not at this point. This is the blocking stage, so we're gonna leave it here for now and then move on to the leaves next. And before you start working finer gradations on a second layer over the lemon, think of this as underpainting. Before you start to work some finer gradations on the lemon, I want you to practice the gradation, the value scale gradation in paint. Okay, Pat, if you've struggled with the pace, then remember that you've always got the video to to go back to, and it can be a lot easier to pause it as you go along, you know. And we've got, you know, there's no mad rush on this. We've got, you know, a few weeks left of this workshop still. So if you feel you need to redo it, that's certainly not a bad thing. And I would say the same to everybody else as well. I think the experience of painting along live is a good one, because it keeps you from fussing too much. But also, if you feel that you're not happy with how it's turned out at this point, and you're not getting the feeling of light and form, then have another go. Have another go at it. Just like with the drawings. Did I go too fast at the end bit then when I did the intermediate values between the modelling factors? Was that a bit too quick? Okay, thanks, Marilyn. Remember, we're not looking for, it's fine for it to look rough. It should look a bit rough at this stage. Part of painting, I think, is feeling confident enough at the early stages of a piece for it to be rough. You know, we're underpainting here, knowing that there's going to be another stage, at least one, in which you can refine the forms. So we just want this to work when we squint right down, when we stand back and squint right down. We're not looking for anything approaching a finished painting at this point. We're just looking for a feeling of light and form when we squint. So you want to be at least 6 feet back from it when you're judging it. And all of the fine adjustments of value will be done after this, when this has become touch dry, like in a week or so. In the meantime, I'm hoping that you will be practicing the value gradation exercise, which I will be giving you a video on. So if you can get to a point where you can create like a value scale like this, but with a very smooth gradation all the way from the light to the shadow, then you know you can handle pretty much any form in paint. Not sure about it, Betty. Okay. Oh yes, Pat asked if I would post this one in the group tomorrow. I always forget to do that. I don't know why it is. To be honest with you, I always feel a little bit mentally sort of blasted the day after a live session, and I think I just forget. I forget to do things even though I mean to do them. But I will try very hard, and feel free to PM me or something and say, where's the study, if I forget to do it by the afternoon. Betty says the handling of the back part of the cloth and its values, not a straight line. Oh, you mean when we changed this, when we did the edge handling here? Right, okay. Now would be a good time to correct it, or, you know, like after we've blocked in the leaves, because the paint is still very malleable at this point, and you know what the values need to be. So don't be afraid to get your, you know, redo the line, and then don't be afraid to get your value scale out and check that the values are the ones that you want, you know, in the right place. And that also you will be able to change if you need to. Okay, so for the leaves, we're gonna just block them in really simply at the moment. So I'm going to change back to the other reference to show you the numbers. Unfortunately, it is a different size, so I'm going to have to resize it. Oh, I can actually do it this way, I think, so this should work. It's probably not too bad, Betty, because those bits don't matter too much, and you can change it with glazes and stuff, with scumbles and glazes later if you need to. Remember, this is underpainting at this point. We're just getting the overall kind of balance and the forms sorted and things in the right place. How is everybody finding it? Are you managing to keep your little puddles of paint separate like this, or are they kind of getting munged? We don't want them to munge too much. If you lose the clarity of the values here, then you will lose it here. You have to keep them separate down here. I guess that could happen, and that would make it difficult. But Pat, you were saying you were struggling with managing the paint. If these separate piles of paint start to get squished together, then and it's no longer clear which is which, then you will start to lose the clarity of the painting. It all happens. Painting happens mostly here on the palette. For this and for when you're painting in colour as well. Okay. So for the leaves, I'm going to use a synthetic. The reason for that is because of the kind of shapes they are, and I want fairly hard edges at the sides of them. I often use these. This is a Rosemary's Eclipse, but any synthetic about this size will do. This is like a 1/2 inch. Because they're basically kind of flat shapes. So we're going to put these in really simply. So if we go for this leaf at the back, that's a 3.5, right? So here is our 3. There is our 4. I'm going to get a little bit of oil on this and then wipe it off. Mix between the 3 and the 4. So when you're mixing like this, when you're pulling them, you don't drag the brush straight through this whole pile. You just pull a little off the edge of the pile and pull a little off the other pile and then mix them together. Then check it with the value scale. I should be a 3.5, which is up here, which is just about bang on. And the whole of this leaf I'm going to paint like a 3.5. Just trying to keep the shape. With a reasonably hard edge. I think it looks slightly dark against the background, but I think that's because the background needs to go down in value a little bit. I don't think my background is quite dark enough, but I'm going to wait and I'm going to do that, bring this value down on the next layer, because I'm painting a dark value over a white ground. So it hasn't completely covered. If I get we were after a 1.5 there, so if I get my Munsell chip out and I put it against that, it's a little bit darker, the chip. I think I haven't quite got to 1.5. I'm probably about a 2. There's a value 2. Yeah, I'm about a 2 here when I want to be a little bit lower than that. So this next leaf I'm going to paint in 2 halves, the top half of 4 and the bottom half of 5. Now these we already, by the way, I'm always wiping off my brush in between. So the bottom half I'm going to do as a 4. Sorry, the top half as a 4. And the bottom half as a 5. Which will be enough to show a bit of a plane change there. Make sure it meets up with the cast shadow. So we can be putting more detail into these leaves at a later stage. They're coming out looking slightly dark, I think, but I also think they look lovely, so I'm not going to bother changing it for now. And that also can be changed and edited later. This one here is going to be about a 4, this funny shaped one here. So pick up some 4. I just want to get the shape in with hard edges. you know, stick to the drawing, be brave with this, and just paint it the right shape. All the same value, I'm doing this one. And this one at the back is a little lighter, so I would use a 5 for the one at the back here. Not bothering about the stem for now. I know roughly where it's going to go. Be more inclined to paint that in later. What we're trying to focus on at the moment is the accuracy of the values, a little bit of the edge handling. Creating light and form at this stage, and that's really about it. No details at all at this point. But you really don't need them, you know. You just need to fill in this area behind the lemon here, and it was this value here, which is like about a 5, I think. Used there, yeah. It's actually about the same as the leaf. So the quality of the edges here is important. Hard edge on the leaves, soft edge on the cast shadow. And that creates that feeling of the cast shadow being a cast shadow cast by these hard shapes of the leaves. And that's why I wanted to use a synthetic flat for those, because it gives you a nice, very flat shape. I'm actually missing a cast shadow. I've just realized this leaf here in the middle needs a little bit of a cast shadow, so I'm going to have to put that in. Put it in a value 4. It's lower value than the leaf. I'm not going to bother doing softening or anything like that on it because it's hidden away at the back there. Just need it to be there. And that's it. That's this stage of the painting done. I've got a couple of little skips where I've got some white panels showing, so I need to fill those in. So it's a different approach than either of the charcoal ones that we've done, but we're basically dealing with exactly the same things, making sure that we get the drawing accurate and then the values right. Some treatment of the edges and you start to get a feeling of form appearing. And it's this last bit I always find when you finally filled the panel and there's no white panel left. At this point, you can see how things are working. Before this point, it's difficult to see, you know, all of the relationships together. But when you finally put everything in, like when the leaves went in here, everything else everything goes and sort of comes together and sticks together. That was actually, I think this is a record. I didn't mean this to be quite as long a session, but we've ended up going for about 3.5 hours, which is a pretty long session. We're about 9:30 now. I hope it wasn't too long for you. If there's any part of this that you've struggled with and you felt that it hasn't come out quite right in the painting, obviously by all means, you can, just as the same as with the drawings, have another go, do it again. Go through the video slowly and take as long as you need. So we're not going to be on this again for a fortnight. I'm going to have a critique session on this first stage next week, but I think the critique is going to be on the Monday. Just let me check my calendar quickly. because I'm away a couple of days next week. I'll just check it quickly. Yeah, next week the critique session is going to be on the Monday, okay? The Zoom critique call, and we'll go through the paintings in detail at the stage they're at then. But remember, what we're not looking for at the moment is a finished painting. We're looking for a block-in. So don't be tempted to finish everything. Certainly don't be tempted to mess with the modeling too much. We just want to have, generally speaking, the right values in the right place. And if you have that, and a little bit of the edge handling, especially on the cast shadows, then that's as far as you need to take it at this point. Slightly different way of working with the chalk and charcoal, where you would tend to finish each area at a time. But it's basically the same thing that we're doing. Okay, so hopefully you've got a little fat fish with some rather bizarre fins sitting on a white cloth, wondering why it isn't in the sea. Okay. So once again, thanks for showing up and being a great group. I will post this. I will try very, very hard to remember to post this tomorrow in the group so you can get a closer look at this painting. Please post yours as well, and I'll pop in the group and have a look, and we'll take it from there. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody, and I will see you again soon.